I watched my husband disappear through airport security, waving one last time before the crowd swallowed him whole. 40 minutes later, our housekeeper called me crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Emily, don't go home," she said. "I thought the house was on fire." Instead, when I opened the security camera on my phone, I saw my in-laws standing over an open safe in my husband's office, pulling out passports and documents like thieves in broad daylight. And then impossibly, the front door opened and Ryan walked in, still wearing the exact suit he'd worn to the airport. Dallas Love Field was already busy at 7 in the morning, the kind of controlled chaos I'd navigated 100 times over 20 years of marriage. Ryan pulled his black carry-on behind him, the same scuffed one he always used for short trips, and kissed me at the drop-off curb the way he always did, quick, familiar, his hand briefly at the small of my back. "See you Sunday," he said, smiling in that easy way that had disarmed me the first time I met him and never really stopped. "Call me when you land," I told him. He nodded, already turning toward the terminal doors. I stood there longer than I needed to, watching him wheel that suitcase through the sliding glass doors, watching him disappear into the security line, watching until I genuinely couldn't pick him out from the crowd anymore. 3 days in Denver for his firm's regional conference. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. If anything, it felt like every other business trip he'd taken in the past 2 decades, routine to the point of being forgettable. I drove home with the radio on, thinking about a client meeting I had that afternoon, a kitchen renovation for a family in Highland Park that was 3 weeks behind schedule. I was maybe 10 minutes from the house when my phone rang. Sophia Alvarez had worked for us 13 years. She'd started when our house still smelled like fresh paint and unopened boxes, and she'd stayed through every renovation, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday since. I answered without much thought, expecting some small logistical question about the cleaning schedule. Instead, I heard her crying. "Emily," she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Emily, don't go home." My stomach dropped in that instant, sudden way it does when your body understands something is wrong before your mind catches up. "Sophia, what happened? Is something on fire? Did someone break in?" "Just please open the camera, open the app, I don't know how to explain it." I pulled into a gas station parking lot on Mockingbird Lane, my hands not quite steady as I opened the security app on my phone. The feed from the office camera loaded slowly, and for a moment, I just stared at a grainy static image before it resolved into something I understood. Diane, my mother-in-law, 71 years old, always so particular about her appearance, standing in Ryan's home office in a blouse I recognized from Easter dinner. Beside her, Thomas, my father-in-law, a quiet man who rarely said more than a dozen words at any family gathering. And a third person, a woman I had never seen before, maybe in her late 30s, dark-haired, moving with the kind of familiarity that suggested this wasn't her first time in that room. They were standing over the safe. Our safe, bolted into the floor of the closet behind Ryan's desk, the one that held our passports, the deed to the house, insurance documents, things we rarely touched except once a year for tax season. It was open. Diane was handing folders to the woman I didn't recognize. Thomas was holding what looked like our passports, flipping through them like he was checking something specific. I sat in that parking lot with the engine running and felt something in my chest go strangely quiet, the way a room goes quiet right before a storm. "Sophia," I said carefully, "who is that woman?" "I don't know her name," Sophia whispered. "I've never seen her before either. I was in the laundry room when I heard them come in. I didn't know what to do, I called you first." I watched the screen, waiting for some explanation to present itself. Some innocent reason my in-laws would be going through our safe with a stranger while my husband was 30,000 feet in the air. None came. What came instead, a few seconds later, was the sound of the doorbell through my phone speaker, tiny and distant, and I watched the woman on screen turn and hurry toward the front hallway to answer it. The door opened and Ryan walked in. He was still wearing the navy suit he'd worn to the airport that morning, still pulling the same black carry-on behind him, wheels catching slightly on the threshold, the way they always did. He walked into our house, into that office, like a man arriving somewhere he was expected, somewhere he belonged. I stared at the screen so long the gas station attendant knocked on my window to ask if I needed anything. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. My mind was doing something it had never done before, trying to reconcile two things that could not both be true. A husband on a plane to Denver, and a husband standing in our office in the exact same suit 40 minutes after I'd watched him vanish through security. That's not possible, I whispered, mostly to myself. He's supposed to be on a plane right now. I didn't drive home. I didn't drive anywhere, really. I just sat in that gas station parking lot with the engine idling, watching my own house through a 4-inch screen like it belonged to strangers. My first instinct was to call Ryan directly, to demand an explanation, to hear him lie to my face in real time, just so I could catch the exact moment his voice changed. I had the number pulled up, my thumb hovering over the call button, when I remembered Linda Morrison's business card still sitting in my wallet from a fundraiser lunch 8 months earlier. I'd taken it as a courtesy that day, never imagining I'd need it. I called her instead. "Don't call anyone," Linda said after I'd explained what I was watching in halting, disbelieving sentences. "Not him, not his parents, not anyone in that house. Whatever this is, you have the advantage right now, and the second you make a call, you lose it." "He's supposed to be in Denver," I kept saying, like repeating it would make it make sense. "I watched him go through security." "People cancel flights after security all the time," Linda said, her voice steady in a way that suggested she'd walked other women through exactly this kind of morning before. "Keep watching, don't do anything yet, just watch." So I watched. Ryan set his suitcase down in the office and unzipped it without any of the urgency I would have expected from a man supposedly racing to catch a rescheduled flight. The woman, still nameless to me at that point, crossed the room and put her arms around him, easy and familiar, the kind of embrace that comes from repetition, not novelty. Diane, watching them from beside the open safe, smiled and said something I couldn't fully hear through the camera's tiny audio, but I caught 3 words clearly enough. 3 days is enough. I felt those words land somewhere low in my stomach. 3 days, the exact length of the trip Ryan had told me about, not a coincidence, a plan. Ryan reached into the suitcase and started pulling things out, and my confusion only deepened because none of it was clothing. No shirts, no shaving kit, no the things you'd expect from a man packing for a business conference. Instead, there were folders, thick ones bound with rubber bands, a small metal box that looked like it held a spare set of keys, a USB drive in a clear plastic case, documents that even through the grainy camera feed I could tell were contracts, multiple pages, official looking. The suitcase had never held clothes at all. "He's using the trip as cover," I said slowly, understanding arriving in pieces like a jigsaw puzzle assembling itself against my will. This was never about a conference. Ryan said something then, clear enough for the camera to catch. "She won't be back before Sunday." Diane's response was immediate, almost gleeful. "Then we have plenty of time." I sat there feeling the shape of something much larger than an affair beginning to take form, though I couldn't yet see its edges. An affair I might have survived processing on my own terms in my own time. This felt different. This felt orchestrated with dates and props, and a suitcase packed specifically to deceive me, and I was only now 40 minutes into it, starting to understand how long it might have been running underneath my ordinary life. My phone buzzed with another call. Sophia again, her voice lower now, more careful, like she was trying not to be overheard. "Emily, I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago." She paused and I could hear her breathing unsteadily. "For months now, whenever Mr. Harper said you were traveling for work, he would bring a woman here. I assumed she was a colleague at first. I told myself that, but I've seen her enough times now to know that isn't true." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, though I already understood the answer before she gave it. "Because I wasn't certain, and because I didn't want to be the reason your marriage ended if I was wrong." Her voice cracked. "But today felt different. His parents have never come before. Something about today felt like it mattered more." I told her she'd done the right thing, that none of this was her fault. And I meant it, even through the fog of everything else crowding my thoughts. Sophia had 13 years of loyalty behind her, and she'd chosen, in the moment it counted most, to protect me rather than stay comfortably uninvolved. I saved the footage before anything else. Every angle, every timestamp exported to a private folder on my laptop before I did anything else that morning. Linda had told me to document everything, and some steady, unfamiliar part of me had already understood why. It was the camera positioned near the front gate that caught the final piece of that morning's puzzle. A courier vehicle pulled up shortly after 11, and a man in a delivery uniform walked a thick envelope to the front door, waiting for a signature before handing it over. Ryan met him outside, signed quickly, and turned the envelope over in his hands as he walked back toward the house. I zoomed in as far as the app would allow, my heart doing something slow and heavy in my chest as the words on the envelope came into focus. Petition for dissolution. He was preparing to file for divorce today. While I sat unknowing, believing him 30,000 feet above Colorado, my husband was standing in our front yard, holding the paperwork that would end our marriage on his terms in his timeline, before I'd even had the chance to learn any of this was happening. Linda's office became my second home over the following days, a converted brownstone near the arts district with tall windows and a quiet that felt deliberate, the kind of stillness built to hold other people's worst mornings. The trust is the strange part, Linda said, spreading printouts across her desk on my second visit. Her team had already pulled records on a limited liability entity Ryan had formed 9 weeks earlier, funneling a portion of our joint investment accounts into it under language dense enough that I would have skimmed past it entirely if I hadn't been looking for exactly this kind of thing. By every normal read of this, you're still listed as primary beneficiary. That doesn't make sense, I said. If he's planning to divorce me and hide assets, why would he leave me as the beneficiary of anything? Linda leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk in the unhurried way she had of thinking out loud. Because this isn't the final move, it's a placeholder. He's using your name as beneficiary right now so nothing looks suspicious to a bank or an auditor, and he'll change it the moment the divorce filing goes through and the accounts are legally separated. He's not hiding the theft yet. He's building the structure he'll use to commit it. I thought about the suitcase full of documents instead of clothes, the folders Diane had been sorting through the safe, and understood with a kind of cold clarity that Linda was almost certainly right. This wasn't a man reacting emotionally to a failing marriage. This was a man executing a sequence. Linda advised me to keep behaving normally, at least on the surface, while her team worked quietly behind the scenes. It was excruciating advice to follow. 2 days after the airport, Ryan called me on video and I answered, sitting at my kitchen table, doing my best to sound like a woman who believed her husband was in Denver. "How's the conference?" I asked. "Long," he said, running a hand through his hair. The hotel room behind him was generic in that particular way, beige walls, a framed print of mountains, a Denver skyline visible through what looked like a window. "I miss our bed already." I nearly laughed and covered it by asking about his sessions, his colleagues, small manufactured details he answered easily enough. He was good at this. He'd clearly always been good at this. And the unsettling part wasn't his fluency in the lie. It was wondering how many other ordinary phone calls over 20 years had been built on the same quiet skill. I mentioned the call to Linda afterward almost as an aside, and she asked me to send her a screenshot of the background. Her paralegal ran it through a reverse image search within the hour. It was a stock Zoom virtual background available free downloadable by anyone, titled simply, Downtown Skyline Generic. "He's not in Denver," Linda said when she called me back. "That background is a stock image, and we pulled traffic camera footage near your neighborhood from yesterday afternoon. His car passed through the intersection 2 blocks from your house at 4:17 p.m. She let that sit for a moment. "Emily, he never left Dallas." I sat with the phone against my ear for a long time after we hung up, staring at nothing in particular, feeling something shift permanently in how I understood the last 2 decades of my marriage. Not just this week, not just this trip. I found myself wondering for the first time how many business trips over the years had actually just been Ryan somewhere close by, hiding in plain sight, using my trust as the one piece of camouflage he never had to work very hard to maintain. The final piece of that particular puzzle came from an email Linda's investigator found buried in an old, rarely used account of Ryan's. One he'd apparently forgotten, I still technically had partial access to from years earlier, back when we'd shared a family calendar system for scheduling. The email was a cancellation confirmation from the airline, time-stamped 14 minutes after his boarding pass had scanned through security. He hadn't missed his flight. He hadn't been delayed. He had walked through the security checkpoint I'd watched him disappear behind, waited long enough to be sure I was gone, and then cancelled the ticket and walked straight back out through an exit near the far end of the terminal. The whole airport goodbye had been theatre. My last image of him boarding a plane had been engineered specifically for my benefit. A performance built around one single calculated goal, buying himself 3 uninterrupted days to move money, gather documents, and set his family's plan into motion while I sat somewhere hundreds of miles away in my imagination, believing every word he told me. I printed that email and set it on the growing stack of evidence Linda kept in a locked file cabinet in her office. And I remember thinking, staring at it, that I had spent 20 years believing my husband was many things, imperfect, occasionally distant, but fundamentally honest in the ways that mattered. I was beginning to understand I hadn't known him at all. The financial trail, once Linda's forensic team started pulling threads, unraveled faster than any of us expected, and further back than I'd ever have guessed on my own. Over the preceding 11 months, Ryan had sold off a significant block of shares from a joint brokerage account we'd built together since our early 30s. Money I'd always assumed was simply growing quietly in the background, the way it had for 2 decades. He'd liquidated it in 3 separate transactions, small enough that none of them individually triggered anything I might have noticed on a shared statement, and used the proceeds to purchase 2 rental properties in Frisco and a small commercial lot near the tollway. Every single one of them was titled in Diane's name. Not held jointly, not structured through any entity connected to Ryan or me. Just Diane Harper listed as sole owner on paperwork filed with a county clerk's office, while I was, according to every record, hosting a client dinner for the Highland Park renovation 2 counties away. Your father-in-law didn't know any of this, Linda said, sliding a printed asset summary across the table to me. We pulled a deposition transcript from an unrelated property dispute Thomas was involved in last year. He wasn't even aware Diane had opened a new account at Frost Bank. If he doesn't know about a checking account, he almost certainly doesn't know about 11 months of real estate acquisitions. I thought about Thomas at Easter, quiet as always, passing the mashed potatoes and asking Ryan polite questions about the Cowboys' draft picks. A man who trusted his wife enough not to ask what she did with her afternoons. It was strange feeling something close to pity for him in the middle of my own unraveling. Natalie, I finally had her name by then, pulled from a hotel reservation Linda's investigator had traced. And she was unraveling something of her own, though I didn't know it yet. Sophia mentioned it first in one of our now regular hushed phone calls. She's different lately. I heard her ask him once why they never go anywhere together in public, why it's always this house, always late at night. Never a restaurant, never anywhere someone might see them. Ryan, according to what little Sophia overheard, always had an answer ready. Business associates, reputational concerns, the kind of vague, plausible-sounding excuses that work perfectly well on someone who wants desperately to believe them. But cracks don't stay hidden forever, not when someone's paying close enough attention. Sophia told me that the week before, Natalie had been in the kitchen while Ryan took a call, and she'd noticed the account name on the caller ID flashed briefly across his screen when he set the phone down. A joint account, my name still listed beside his. Natalie apparently hadn't said anything that day, but something had clearly shifted in her posture around the house after that. Sophia described it as the difference between a woman who felt secure in a home and a woman who'd started quietly counting the exits. The call came to me directly 4 days later. An unfamiliar number, a voice tight with something I recognized immediately because I'd been carrying the same feeling myself for over a week. Emily, she said, this is Natalie, I think you and I need to talk. Her voice caught, I think we've both been lied to. We didn't meet that day, I wasn't ready. And I told her so honestly, and to her credit she didn't push. But in that short conversation, careful and halting on both ends, I learned that Ryan had told her months earlier that our divorce was already finalized, that the marriage had ended quietly the previous year, that I'd moved on, that our continued appearances together at family functions were simply for optics, for his agging parents' sake, nothing more. He said you two barely spoke anymore, Natalie told me. He said it was amicable, he said you understood. I sat with the phone against my ear in my parked car outside Linda's office, feeling something twist in my chest that wasn't quite anger, and wasn't quite grief. Something closer to disbelief at the sheer architecture of what Ryan had built, an entire second reality detailed enough to survive months of scrutiny, constructed for an audience of exactly one woman who had no reason not to believe him. I didn't know, Natalie said quietly. I need you to know I didn't know. And I believed her, the same instinctive read I'd get days later sitting across from her in person. Before we hung up, she said one more thing that stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that call. He never lets the account statements come to the house when I'm there. I used to think that was normal. I don't think that anymore. I closed my eyes in that car for a long moment after the call ended, understanding that whatever else Ryan Harper was, he was also remarkably consistent. Careful, controlled, methodical in ways that had clearly served him well for a very long time, right up until two women on opposite ends of his deception had finally started comparing notes. We met the following week at a quiet cafe in Addison that neither of us had any history with, neutral ground for a conversation that had no precedent either of us could draw on. Natalie was already seated when I arrived, and she stood halfway when she saw me, an instinct toward courtesy that seemed at odds with everything she must have been feeling. She was younger than me by several years, striking in an understated way, dressed like a woman who'd built a career on precision. An architect, Sophia had told me, and I could see it in the careful way she'd arranged her folder of papers on the table before I'd even sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I almost didn't." I sat across from her, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Two women measuring each other across a small round table, each trying to determine how much of the other's pain was real and how much might still be performance. I decided quickly it wasn't performance. Grief has a particular quality that's difficult to fake, and Natalie's was written plainly across her face. She slid the folder toward me without preamble. Email printouts, text message screenshots, a hotel confirmation from 8 months earlier. "I want you to see everything," she said. "I don't want to hide anything from you. I think I've had enough of things being hidden from me." We went through it methodically, the way Linda and I had gone through evidence for the past 2 weeks. Except this time, the exercise felt less like building a case and more like two people piecing together the true shape of a lie they'd each only seen half of. Ryan had told Natalie our divorce was finalized 14 months ago. He told me that same period that business was simply demanding and travel was unavoidable. Two timelines running in parallel, each engineered to keep its intended audience calm and uninformed. "Diane told me something once," Natalie said, her voice dropping. "At dinner maybe 5 months ago, she said, 'You'll be part of this family soon enough, we just need to handle a few things first.'" She looked up at me. I thought she meant the wedding. I actually thought she was talking about wedding planning. I felt something hollow open in my chest, not for myself this time but for her. For the version of Natalie who had sat at that dinner table, believing she was being welcomed into a family, when in reality she was being managed. Positioned, kept patient, while the actual machinery of Ryan's plan moved forward without her. "I'm not your enemy," she said quietly. And I told her I already understood that and meant it. Whatever anger I still carried, and there was plenty of it, none of it belonged to the woman sitting across from me, holding out evidence with hands that wouldn't quite stay still. She told me more that afternoon. Small details that individually seemed insignificant, but together painted a portrait of a relationship built entirely on management. Ryan never introduced her to anyone outside his immediate family. He always paid in cash when they went anywhere public. He'd asked her twice to sign documents she didn't fully understand, framing them as routine, nothing to worry about, just business formalities tied to some property transaction. That detail, more than any other, made my pulse quicken. I called Linda that evening, and 2 days later, she confirmed what I'd already begun to suspect. One of the documents Natalie had unknowingly signed, believing it to be a standard witness signature on a business form, was actually a notarized affidavit supporting a property transfer. The same Frisco rental property Ryan had purchased under Diane's name months earlier. Natalie's signature had been used to lend legitimacy to a transaction she had no real understanding of. Her trust, weaponized just as thoroughly as mine had been, only in a different direction. Worse still, Linda's forensic examiner flagged something else buried in the paperwork tied to our house. A digital signature on a preliminary transfer document dated 3 weeks earlier that was supposed to be mine. I had never seen that document. I had never signed anything electronically related to our house that entire year. "He's preparing to transfer the house," Linda told me over the phone, her voice carrying the particular steadiness she reserved for the moments that mattered most. "Probably into the same structure as the other properties. If this had gone through before you found out any of this, Emily, you could have lost your home without ever having agreed to give it up." I sat with that for a long moment after we hung up, staring at the muted television in my temporary apartment, thinking about 20 years of mortgage payments and renovations and holidays hosted within those walls, nearly stolen out from under me with a forged signature I would never have thought to question. The final development that week came from an unlikely source. Sophia called late on a Thursday night, her voice carrying a different kind of urgency than before, not fear this time, but something closer to disbelief. "Emily," she said, "Thomas overheard them. Diane and Ryan talking in the kitchen this afternoon. He didn't say anything to them, but he came and found me afterward. He looked like a different man. I think he's starting to understand what his wife has actually been doing. The deposition took place in a conference room downtown, the kind with a long table and a court reporter set up quietly in the corner, her fingers already resting over the keys before anyone had said a word worth recording. Ryan arrived looking composed, almost relaxed in a grey suit I recognized from countless client dinners over the years. He believed, I could tell from the moment he sat down, that this was simply about the affair. An uncomfortable but survivable conversation about infidelity, the kind of thing his lawyer had probably told him to sit through with a suitably contrite expression, and let the settlement negotiations handle the rest. He had no idea how much we actually knew. Linda began methodically, the way she'd built every part of this case, laying groundwork before revealing anything that mattered. She asked about the Denver trip. Ryan described the conference in convincing detail, sessions he'd apparently researched well enough to discuss specific speaker names and panel topics. "And you flew back Sunday as planned?" Linda asked. "That's right." Linda slid a single sheet of paper across the table. The airline cancellation confirmation time-stamped 14 minutes after his boarding pass scan. I watched something flicker behind Ryan's eyes, quick and involuntary. A man recalculating in real time. "That must be an error," he said. "We also have traffic camera footage placing your vehicle 2 blocks from your house that same afternoon," Linda continued, unhurried, sliding a second document across the table. "And a Zoom call you made to your wife, from what our investigator confirmed, is a stock virtual background, not an actual hotel room in Denver." Ryan's attorney leaned toward him, whispering something I couldn't hear. Ryan's jaw tightened. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, but the confidence had thinned considerably. Linda wasn't finished. Bank records came next. The trust formation, the Frisco properties titled under Diane's name, the commercial lot near the tollway. Each document laid on the table with the same unhurried precision, building a wall between Ryan and any remaining plausible explanation. Then came the forged signature on the house transfer document, magnified on a printed comparison, beside an authentic sample of my handwriting from a notarized will we'd filed years earlier. The difference, once you knew to look for it, was obvious. Diane, seated beside her son, tried twice to interject. "This is a family matter," she said the first time. "These are simply estate planning decisions that got mischaracterized." The second time, after Linda produced Natalie's signed affidavit and explained precisely how it had been used, Diane said nothing at all. Her hands folded tightly in her lap, her composure visibly costing her more effort with every passing minute. The moment that changed the entire room came when Linda played the airport security footage. Black and white, time-stamped, unmistakable. Ryan walking through the checkpoint at 7:14 that morning. Ryan standing near a bank of seats for several minutes, checking his phone. And then at 7:26, Ryan walking calmly toward a service corridor near gate C14, used primarily by airport staff, and exiting through a door that led back toward ground transportation. 12 minutes. That was the entire span of the lie that had launched this whole nightmare. 12 minutes between disappearing behind security and walking back out a different door entirely, never having come close to boarding a plane. I heard Thomas exhale slowly beside me. I hadn't fully registered him joining the deposition until that moment. Linda had quietly invited him at his own request after Sophia's call about the overheard kitchen conversation. He'd said almost nothing since arriving, sitting a little apart from Diane, watching everything with the careful attention of a man double-checking a foundation he'd trusted his whole life. He turned to his wife. "Did you know about this?" His voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. The house, the forged signature, using that poor woman's signature without her understanding what she was signing. "Did you know?" Diane opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it felt considerably longer, stretching across the table like something physical. "I was protecting this family," she finally said. "You were stealing from her," Thomas said, nodding toward me, his voice quiet but absolutely without doubt. 20 years, Diane. 20 years she's been part of this family, and you helped him do this to her." Ryan, for the first time since I'd known him, had nothing prepared. No smooth explanation, no easy redirect, no charm to fall back on. He sat there while the evidence continued accumulating on the table in front of him. Camera footage, bank records, forged documents, a mother who'd just been confronted by his own father. And I watched with something that felt less like satisfaction and more like exhausted relief, as the last of his control over this story finally slipped away entirely. Linda closed her folder with quiet finality. I think we have everything we need for trial. The trial itself took less time than I expected, largely because there was very little left for Ryan's side to contest. Linda presented the evidence in the same methodical order she'd used in the deposition. The cancelled flight, the 12-minute gap on airport security footage, the forged signature, the trust structured around properties hidden under Diane's name, Natalie's affidavit explaining how her own signature had been used without her understanding. The judge, a woman with a measured, unhurried manner that reminded me a little of Linda herself, took 2 days to review everything before issuing her ruling. Every fraudulent transfer was voided. The Frisco properties and the commercial lot near the tollway were returned to the marital estate, to be divided under standard community property guidelines, rather than the arrangement Ryan and Diane had spent nearly a year quietly engineering. Ryan was ordered to pay restitution for the liquidated brokerage funds with interest, along with a substantial share of my legal costs. The judge noted for the record what she called a sustained and deliberate pattern of financial fraud, compounded by the exploitation of a third party's trust for the purpose of validating fraudulent documents. Diane's role didn't end quietly in a courtroom either, because her name appeared directly on the falsified property titles, and because of testimony establishing her active participation, the judge referred the matter to the district attorney's office for further review regarding potential asset concealment charges. Whatever happened next for Diane, it would happen in a different courtroom on a different, harder day. Thomas found me in the hallway after the ruling, alone, without Diane beside him, for what I understood by then was becoming a permanent condition. He looked older than he had even a month earlier. The kind of agging that happens all at once when a lifetime of careful assumptions collapses under new information. I spent 46 years thinking I knew my wife, he said. I'm sorry, Emily, for all of it, for never once thinking to ask the right questions. I told him what I believed to be true, that some deceptions are built specifically so the people closest to them never see the seams. He nodded slowly, shook my hand rather than embracing me, and walked away with the particular posture of a man learning to carry something heavy for the first time in his life. Natalie, I